we're very excited as a chamber to have him. We're grateful that he would show up for us here. And we also are looking forward to building a relationship with the congressman. And we're interested in hearing what his vision is for Lynn. He's spoken on it quite a bit through the campaign. And now it's time for the rubber to hit the road, so to speak. But, we're also quite proud of him. He's a local guy, he's a Marblehead guy, a Harvard guy, and we all know about his service in the military. It's exemplary. And now he's taken the big step. He ran for Congress, his first run for public office that we know of, I guess, and he won. So it's really extraordinary. And so I guess we're just excited to have him and hear what his vision is for Lynn. So thank you, Congressman Elect.
It's great to be here, and I intend to come back. This isn't going to be a one-time visit. It's important that you got to hold me to that. It's important that we work together because there was a day when being in Congress meant that you just got earmarks for a city that you wanted to support, and you sent money, and that was all you did. You sort of sat back and got those earmarks inserted into bills, and that drove economic development. Well, we don't have earmarks anymore. That's not a way that you can do things. But what a congressman can do is act as a convener, to bring together leaders from the public sector and the private sector to really spur economic development and cooperation in places where we might not otherwise have it. And that is my vision for my role in helping Lynn. Now, I want to be careful of just getting too much into Seth Moulton's vision for Lynn, because that's really not fair. I believe that Lynn has tremendous potential, and if I talk about my vision, it's in very broad terms. Lynn is a gateway city that can influence the entire district in a positive way if it has stronger economic development. If Lynn acts as a catalyst to bring businesses out of Boston and Cambridge as they expand, it'll benefit the entire North Shore and indeed the entire district. That's the beauty of a gateway city. Lynn has incredible potential. I would argue that Lynn, there's no city in the state that has more potential than the city of Lynn, given its proximity to Boston, and yet the fact that there is an awful lot of undeveloped land or places that really haven't seen the fruits of economic revival that we've seen in places like Salem, for example, that have really turned around a lot in the last 10 or 15 years. So there's tremendous potential in Lynn. And the opportunity, I think, for me is to help bring together the different folks who want to see that happen. Try to get some federal resources in certain places, try to leverage state resources, but also work very closely with the private sector to see what we can do to spur economic development. So Lynn has great potential. It's in the right place, and its development will help the rest of the North Shore and indeed the rest of the district. And I also think, third, that the timing is right now. I was asked a very, very good question by a student at Lynn Classical who put me on the spot and said, Mr. Moulton, we don't want to have jobs come here in 20 years. We need jobs when we graduate, or 4 years from now, 5 years from now when we graduate from college. So what makes you think that you can make this happen quickly? And I think the answer to that is that my feeling is that the timing right now is right. There's a lot of the ingredients coming together. If you just walk around downtown Lynn right now and see the new restaurants opening up, for example, there's something in the air that's starting to come together. And if we can really capitalize on that and use it as a catalyst to drive some much larger economic development, then it will be a virtuous cycle that will really get Lynn going. And I think that this might be the right time. So I'm excited, but my role here is not to say this is exactly what we're going to do. In fact, formally the role of a representative for the people in Washington is to listen to all of you, to take your ideas and feelings and your needs and represent them in Washington and represent them in the community. So as I start my new job in the next few months, I'm going to be spending most of my time listening. I did grow up in Marblehead. So there are a lot of people here who know better than I do exactly what's needed in Lynn. And my job is to help lead that change, but it's also to listen to you. So I hope this will be a conversation, and I'll talk a little bit more specifically about some of the ideas that we've already been exploring But I want to make sure I emphasize this point, that I'm not coming here just to say this is what you need to do, that I have all the answers and here is a plan. I'm coming here to work with you, to be a partner, to help provide some influence and leverage in places where individually we can't do it on our own. Now, one of the specific things that my team has been working on is this idea that Lynn can be a place that attracts some of the startups that are growing out of places like Boston and Cambridge. There's a tremendous wealth of companies coming out of Boston. We're very fortunate to live not just close to a city, but close to a city that drives so much innovation. And our economy depends on innovation today. Will I work hard to get good jobs back at GE to keep that plant running? Absolutely. In fact, I think I'm in a really good position to do that because of my military background. But it's not just about hanging on to the old jobs. It's about bringing the new, innovative jobs that are part of our innovation economy, innovative manufacturing, tech jobs, and whatnot. The parts of the segments of the economy that are growing most quickly, finding ways to get them to come to Lynn. And I think the opportunity is that you have a city in a prime location with relatively inexpensive real estate and a lot of disused industrial facilities. That's a logical place for startups to expand to as they're trying to grow their space requirements. Right now, they generally skip over us. They go up to New Hampshire, they go out west. They don't just come right to Lynn. But we've looked, the analogy that we've looked at, the example here is the Brooklyn Navy Yards down in New York. A lot of startups begin in Manhattan, and they're the Brooklyn Navy Yards just across the river. It was an extraordinary piece of real estate that had fallen into complete disrepair when basically the Navy moved out. And through some very innovative public-private partnerships, they were able to create this concept called the new lab with innovative manufacturing facilities, and it was the perfect place for these startups out of Manhattan to expand to. Just jump across the river, still within easy access. A lot of people could as easily commute to to different part of Manhattan Island as they could to take the subway across the river to Brooklyn. And this was a place for businesses to expand. It's been tremendously successful. So we actually have brought in some of the architects of that project to take a look at Lynn, and they think that Lynn, with its proximity to Boston and a lot of sort of similar characteristics to Brooklyn Navy Yards, can do the same thing. Now, this is not to say that this is the end-all, be-all of economic revitalization in Lynn, nor is it to say that this is my only vision. But again, I think this is one example of an idea that can be part of the mix and be successful. And I think it's important to tell you that we've taken a very serious look at this, to the point of bringing in consulting firms who made this happen in New York, and they're very optimistic that we can get something done. So I think that's a very good sign, and I hope that it also is a demonstration of my commitment to this. And look, this is work that I started during the campaign, even before I was elected. We already had a meeting with Tom Costin and some other folks in the room just before I went down for my freshman orientation in DC this past week to just get the ball rolling. And I tell you, the response from some local officials, both political and business, was very positive. So I think that's encouraging, and we're going to work to move forward. So this is a pretty high-level talk, and I intend it to be that. But I hope, like I say, that you can see from this particular example that I'm very seriously committed to making this work. And from a political perspective, I also did make this a centerpiece of my campaign. I said that I'm going to work on Lynn. So this isn't just lip service to the idea of coming back here. I want this to be a regular conversation and an ongoing dialogue so that we can make some real progress. So with that, why don't I turn it over to you and your questions, and we can start that discussion today. Yes, sir.
Going on the idea of the Brooklyn Navy Yard, has these people had any contacts with MassBio and the economic development people there to, where they're going now?
Yes, so we have. They've been working in particular with sort of a different group, not MassBio specifically. I've been in contact with MassBio just for some other things, but it's a great example of the kind of group that we would want to develop as we sort of work on this project going forward. Understand at this point it's been fairly preliminary work. I mean, we didn't, I had to focus on November 4th to get elected, right? So there's a few other things going on. But I think that if we can develop some partnerships with groups like that, it'll help. Chip, do you remember the name of the innovation group that Davey has been working with in particular with Peter Ickes? Off the top of my head, I'm forgetting right now. But there's another group similar to that we've already been in conversation with. What's next?
I had a thought.
Sure.
I guess in Massachusetts, you mentioned that businesses where they want to start, and I worry as a I worry as a Mass resident that a lot of businesses, bigger businesses, will bypass Massachusetts because we're so heavily regulated. And I think the business community, the more regulations you put on it, the more stress you put on the business community. And so, I mean, they just increased the minimum wage. They just did the sick day. That was another thing that just passed. And just consistently, businesses, small businesses, which are really the backbone of the country, are just consistently hampered with more regulation. And the law of unintended consequences, I think this will drive a lot of businesses away from Massachusetts. So Massachusetts is just not a very business-friendly state. And I guess I just hope that we go down there when they are working on regulations, regulatory things, because this administration has been really extremely regulatory minded and put a real pressure on business. So I guess just your thoughts on creating a better business.
Those are great questions and thoughts. And so let me.
Can you shut that off or something?
We're losing something.
Technical.
It's coming up. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. This thing is starting to slide up. So the question about regulation and over-regulation. Let me make a few comments. First of all, are there too many regulations out there? I think there are, and fundamentally there are an awful lot of regulations that are just out of date and onerous. And one person suggested, this may not be a practical suggestion, but suggested anytime the U.S. government wants to make a new regulation, they have to take one off the books that's just outdated and not relevant, and yet still creates a lot of bureaucratic headaches. That's probably the principle behind that concept is a good idea. But I think it's also important to say that that there are some things in Massachusetts that while they do, they are sort of in some sense burdens to business, it also makes us a popular place to live and to have sort of the schools and the innovators that drive our economy. And actually, if you look at how Massachusetts' economy is doing overall, it's doing pretty well. I'm a big supporter of earned sick time. We're like the only country in the world, aside from Papua New Guinea, that doesn't have earned sick time. So it may be frustrating to small business owners right now who are faced with implementing this. But I think in the long run, I mean, almost every economy in the world has it. It works well, and it's something that will serve to attract good people to the area. Another thing I do support is raising the minimum wage. Now, you got to be careful about how you do that. There are places where it has not gone well, and it's, I think, legitimately contributed to rises in unemployment. But I'll tell you, Seattle's had tremendous experience with it recently, and that's important for Massachusetts to look at how Seattle has been so successful at dramatically raising the minimum wage, but also keeping the economy very, very strong and keeping employment strong, and basically returning a lot of that money that people, consumers have to the local economy. I mean, one thing you don't want to do is just raise the minimum wage, give people more money, but then have them spend it elsewhere. You make sure people are spending it on in the local economy, on local businesses. I think the kind of development that we have is very important. You want to have development that encourages people to live and work and use businesses in their communities, not just to make a lot of money from working at your local company, but then going to Boston or Framingham or something like that to spend it. Right? I mean, people ought to be able to walk down the street to spend a lot of their money, not just have to go to some shopping mall far away. So the type of development that we have is important. But one of the biggest resources, that Massachusetts has, is its workforce. And I hear this all the time when I go over and talk to businesses, talking to businesses out on 128 especially, Bedford, Burlington, Billerica, which are also part of the 6th District. One of their biggest challenges is just getting people to come work for them, especially these new tech businesses. And some of them have moved from other parts of the country. I was talking to a guy who just moved from Texas. Now, for anyone who doesn't like regulation, I mean, Texas is like, heaven, right? No regulations, there's like the Wild West, right? There's no income tax, there's all this stuff that sounds really good. But the fact of the matter is that they couldn't get nearly the talent in Texas that they can get in Massachusetts. And partly that's because people like to work here, in part because of some of the things that come with, earned sick time is something that's going to be very attractive to workers. For young people, we don't like to drive everywhere, I think it's a pain in the neck when I have to get in my car because I can't be, using my cell phone and texting and surfing the internet and doing my email and whatnot when I have to drive around. So I like to be able to get on a train to go. I'd much rather take the train into Boston than to drive, because I feel like if I drive, I've just wasted an hour of my time, whereas I can be productive the whole way on the train. That's especially true with our generation, my generation, and that's something that's very attractive to Massachusetts as opposed to a place like Texas. In Texas, you have to drive everywhere. So, do we have higher taxes in Massachusetts? Yes. Do we have more regulations? Yes. Are some of those excessive? Yes, I think so. But I don't think we should throw the baby out with the bathwater, because some of those resources actually contribute to making our economy stronger.
Seth, since you mentioned the fact you like to ride a train, talk to you about the possibility with your background working in Texas or with Warren Buffett on his train business. John Dunny, a member of my Marine platoon here, did a lot of research. Sean, what you have? What came up with?
I have here the daily evening item, April 8th, 1912. Governor Foss this forenoon signed a bill permitting it to pass under Lynn Commons.
Tom Carson's pictures right there.
Here's the front page, and here's a map of where the Underground Railroad was going to go. And it was going to be the Boston and Eastern Railroad. And I will give these to you later, but this is 1912, April 8th, 1912, that they were working on getting the subway into Lynn. And I think it's a necessity to get the subway in now. Connecting the airport, a lot has been overlooked. That airport is precious to Lynn. And the faster you get them from the airport to Lynn for work, the more people are going to get to work. That's my personal opinion, as brief as it is. Thank you.
So, it's a great opinion, my opinion. Share your opinion. Logan Airport is expanding dramatically, and it's not just domestic flights, it's actually international flights. There's a lot of economic growth that's coming into Logan, and that we want to be able to capture here on the North Shore. And having good access to Logan is absolutely critical. And what's beautiful about a Blue Line extension to Lynn is that if it connects with the commuter rail, it makes it easier for people throughout the North Shore to access Logan Airport through Lynn. As long as you have a decently fast connection so that you can transfer from a commuter rail train to the Blue Line at Lynn, you could get to the airport. You get to the airport quickly. Now, I think there are an awful lot of improvements that need to be made to the rail system in general, including the commuter rail system. The commuter rail system should really be a lot faster than it is. We should have more frequent service. If we were to electrify the lines, we'd be much better off. Obviously, it would be completely transformative to have a north-south rail link. I mean, there's no single infrastructure project, in my opinion, that would be more transformative for the state of Massachusetts than the north-south rail link. Really, truly transformative. Doing the big day helped because it made it a little bit faster, a little bit easier to get from point A to point B. But doing the north-south rail link would be completely transformative. I mean, you're talking about getting from the North Shore to the South Shore in like half the time, not 10 minutes shorter or something, which the big dig accomplished. You're talking about developing economic connections that are just impossible today. You're talking about being able to get on a train in Penn Station, New York, and go directly to Portland, Maine. So it would be completely transformative. Now, I don't think that as a freshman congressman and the least effective Congress in our nation's history, I'm going to get the North-South Rail Link done in the next 2 years. That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying that it's important to have this vision. It's important that we have advocates for that vision. And it's important that we do what we can to try to bring together the resources to make that happen. I mean, I'll tell you, Governor Dukakis talks about the North-South Rail Link a lot right now. And he has an interesting new ally on this. Does anyone know who Governor Dukakis' new ally on the North-South Rail Link is? It was in the Boston Globe two weeks ago. Bill Weld. An unlikely pair in some respects. But they both recognize that this is absolutely transformative. I don't want to get too far out over my skis, but I would certainly like to think that this becomes a part of the Olympics discussion. If we're going to bring the Olympics to Boston, this has to be part of the discussion. And I can't tell you what a difference it would make for the North Shore. We are well positioned with the basic infrastructure we have in terms of the ability to expand the Blue Line to Lynn and the commuter rail lines that are here. But it would be so transformative if people could use that as a more reasonable transportation option than simply a way to get to work in the morning and home in the evening. You know, right now it's just hard to really use the commuter rail reliably unless you're doing it for work, because there's not very frequent service during other parts of the day. But that could totally change.
Here's an observation with regard to the rail system. You know, it's so important, so vital, but it seems it's a state issue. That's a real problem. We had the big dig, and they can connect, you know, north-south, which is just baffling to me. Secondly, the Blue Line's been on the table, as you know, for decades, since 1912, whatever. And, you know, we did have Speaker McGee and Senate Majority Leader Walt Bogrini, two powerful positions, and we weren't able to get it. So I would hope that using your influence with another local Swampscott guy might be able to do something in terms of either rail or the Blue Line, because it ultimately is a state issue. And so it's critical to the city. But
One of the, I mean, let's just be candid about the Blue Line here. One of the problems is that if you look at the MBTA's long-term plan, extending the Blue Line to Lynn is part of their plan, but it is not near the top of their priority list. There are an awful lot of other infrastructure improvements that they want to do first. So one of the things that we need to think about on the North Shore is how do we bump it up in the priority list? How do we make it more of a priority than some things they want to do in other parts of the system? Well, I think it's not just a question of how do we get that money, because you're right, that work hasn't worked. Senator Tom McGee has been a tremendous advocate of the Blue Line. He's gotten himself into a tremendous position, working on being the lead on the Senate on the transportation budget, the state Senate. But that's not enough anymore just to say, okay, we're going to grab $500 million and just bring it to Lynn to make this happen. I think the opportunity here is to try to develop some sort of public-private partnership that makes the funding easier. Because if we can go to the MBTA and say, I know that there's some other things you want to do, and they're all legitimate projects, but here is a funding package that we can help put together that will make this easier to do than some of the other things. And this is what I worked on in Texas. Now again, I'm not sitting here promising that I'm going to be able to do this. I think it's very important to understand. Tom Costin is a much more experienced and successful politician than I am. And he's been trying to do this for 50 years, right? So
If I were, I'd be standing up there talking to you right now.
I don't want anyone coming in 2 years and say, Seth, you promised you got the Blue Line to Lynn in 6 months and we don't see it yet.
No.
Where are the jobs laying track? But here are some ideas that we can bring to the table. And I think that the big innovation in transportation in the last 10 years has been these public-private partnerships. I worked in a very, very minor role on the first ever public-private partnership commuter rail development, which is actually out in Denver. And they've built a commuter rail system from scratch, through a public-private partnership. The regulations in Colorado, actually, they have these very, very tight regulations on how state funds can be spent. And one of the reasons they actually needed to have the private sector involved is because it was the only way to just literally do the project under the law. But it's made possible a pretty impressive feat. I mean, imagine if we in Boston were to just build 3 new commuter rail lines from scratch. I'm not talking about just reviving old lines like the MBTA is good at doing, but just literally building them from scratch. I mean, that's basically what they're doing out in Denver. It's an incredible project, and it was made possible by doing a public-private partnership that I think has opened up more funding, and frankly, in some ways made the project advance more quickly. So that's the option that we're going to look at with Lynn. We may come to a dead end. We may find that there's just no good private partner for whatever other reason it can't happen. But I know for a fact that nobody has looked at this seriously, and so it deserves our attention.
Should we give you that?
TV viewers.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Emily Reddick. I'm the director of the Downtown Lynn Cultural District. I'm gonna get out of the way of the fridge. In terms of talking about revitalizing areas, and you, in the night that you won the primary, you mentioned you wanted to do for Lynn what Tsongas did for Lowell, as well as talking about the Brooklyn Navy Yard. A major centerpiece of both of those revitalization projects were arts and creative economies. And so in terms of talking with these consultants, what have you learned about using the arts as a tool for neighborhood revitalization, and how do you see that happening in Lynn?
It's a great question. And I think you're right that a lot of these places where we've seen real economic revitalization, the arts have been a big part of it. Why? Because first of all, it's just very simply, it increases the attractiveness of a place to live. I mean, people want to come to good communities. To pick a national example, there was I think it was, let's say it's Boeing, but there's a big company that just was trying to make a decision about where to put their headquarters, and they were looking at Houston, I think, and they were looking at Chicago. And in so many ways, the city, and I think it was Houston, it was another Texas city, it might have been Dallas. But there are an awful lot of things about the lack of regulation in Texas, the lack of income taxes, all these sort of things that it made it seem like an obvious choice to move to Dallas. I think it was Dallas. But instead, they chose Chicago because even though it's a more expensive place to live and it's a little bit harder to do business, that's where all the people wanted to come. And that's where they knew they could get talented workers. That's where their existing employees wanted to live and work. And one of the things they specifically highlighted was the art scene in Chicago. It just isn't the same in the other city in question. So if we can develop an art scene in Lynn, it absolutely will be something that attracts economic development. And I think we've seen this in other places that have really, some of the parts of different cities around the country that have undergone this revitalization. This has been a big part of it. I mean, parts of New York City, for example, the meatpacking district. I mean, there's a lot of art going on there right now. It's now the hottest place to live in New York City. 20 years ago, you wouldn't want to be caught there after 10 o'clock at night. So I do think it's a part. And I think the point here is that a lot of people think of arts as this sort of nice thing to have once everything else is already in place. And I think we should think about it the other way around. That getting arts into a local economy or a local neighborhood can really help drive economic development. Should be one of the early things that we try to do, rather than something that's sort of icing on the cake once the rest of the cake is cooked and ready to eat.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Congressman, Councilman Elect, local sandwich maker and chairman of this great organization. I shared a brief text message with school committee member Charlie Gallo this morning. He wanted to attend and he said he couldn't attend because the last beam is being placed at the Marshall School, which is very significant for us. Recently, our mayor got criticized for making some comments, which I thought were open and practical, and I think she got wrongfully attacked by saying there's a need for the federal government and the state government to provide schools for the city of Lynn. Business, small business, and schools go hand in hand. People move here because of small business, and people stay in the city because of schools. Our schools are falling apart, as you know. What are you prepared to work with the city of Lynn? How are you prepared as far as moving ahead and trying to get cities like Lynn not overlooked on the new schools list? Thanks.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. And you hear about this all the time. Well, I wanted to, I wanted to move to City A, but I went to City B because they got better schools. It was more convenient to live here, but I had to go there because that's where it has good schools. I mean, this is one of the number one factors that people choose where to live on in America today, across the country. So it is critical for our economy that we have good schools. And I will work hard to be the federal advocate for the city of Lynn and for the rest of the cities and towns in the North Shore, in the 6th District, to make sure that that happens. Now, it's not easy because there's not a lot of federal funding out there, and you really do need to be a strong and vocal advocate for getting what is available. But again, this is another place where I think some people have this view that, I've heard people say, whatever, the textbooks are the same, what difference does it make whether or not you have a nice school? You're going to be in a classroom, you're going to have a certain number of desks there, and you're going to have a teacher and kids, and you need the right textbooks, but that's all you need. And in my experience, that's just not true at all. My parents chose to live in Marblehead in 1978 because they were building a new high school.
It's 1978, right. They didn't build it till...
It took about 25 years to make that happen.
Sounds like some
Yeah. But that was their driving, that was the driving, my dad grew up in Swampscott, but that was a driving reason that they wanted to live in Marblehead, because of the schools, and specifically because they were going to build a new high school. When Marblehead finally got around to building their new high school, 20 odd years later, there was a noticeable change in the quality of the education that went on, just because being in a new building attracted better teachers. I mean, I don't know all the details, but you talk to people in Marblehead and they say that it's just, people speak very, very highly of Marblehead High School right now, and the education, not just the building, the education that students get there, in contrast to the situation 10 years ago or whatever, when it was this dilapidated building with leaky roofs. So that investment matters, and as you know, as you've heard me say on the campaign trail before, there's no more important investment that we can make in our future as a country and in our economy than in education. It absolutely drives economic development.
So I loved in your proposals for the 6th District, to Tasso's point, to your point, regarding vocational technical high schools, just had the pleasure to actually attend an event for Lynn Vocational Technical High School because one of our staffers here, Sandra Lewis, got an award. And I learned a little bit more about what that's all about because I went to public education. But what I loved is when he said, when you've got a trade, you've got it made. I thought, that is so simply put, so common sense driven. I'd like to know more about your thoughts about vocational technical high schools, especially because it can directly affect any manufacturing jobs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Good paying jobs.
So let me answer this question on two different levels. The first is just to talk about the practical implications of strong vocational technical education, and then to speak about it maybe a little bit more philosophically. On a practical level, if people go and they get good technical training, they can earn better wages, they can help local economic development, and I think everybody knows that. That's pretty obvious. But what a lot of people miss is that there are an awful lot of places in the country right now where businesses don't want to locate because they simply can't get the talent that they need. And so having a very, very strong vocational technical education system in an area can actually serve to really attract businesses. It's the same issue I was talking about with the tech companies out in Burlington, Billerica, and Bedford. They are in Massachusetts paying higher taxes than they pay in other parts of the country because of the talented workforce that's available. There was a story of a BMW plant that they were opening up down in the south. I think it was South Carolina. And they had so much difficulty just finding the people to work there who were properly trained that they actually had to open a school as a part of the plan. This is not what BMW wanted to do. It's not a problem they have in Germany because there's an awful lot of good vocational technical training. But it was a problem in the U.S. If you know, hypothetically, if another part of the country, maybe you know, right here, could have said, we have that trained workforce, we have the pipeline to produce that trained workforce, it's something that businesses will look at when they decide where to locate. So those are the practical implications, both not just for individuals who you know, have great potential to earn better wages, but for our entire economy when you have a good vocational technical training system. But I also want to say that more on a philosophical level, you know, I think there are some lessons to be learned from Germany, which it's very, very well known for having a strong vocational technical education program. Because one of the things that you'll learn about Germany is that it's not just that they have this part, that somebody can invest a lot, you know, monetarily or whatnot, in that kind of training and education, but also that it's very highly valued by the society. And the fact of the matter is that you know, going to get a 4-year college degree, I think it's an opportunity that should be available to every American. That doesn't mean that every single American is going to benefit most from that kind of an education. And there are some people who would really like to graduate from college, graduate from high school, and go to a vocational technical training program. And we ought to value their contributions to our community and to our society and to our economy as well. So it's a fine line to walk, because I'm not saying that we should discourage people from going to college. The statistics are very clear that having a college education, you know, helps your wages, and I think that opportunity should be available to everybody. But I think it's wrong to say that that's the only way to succeed. I think that's not a fair judgment to make as a country. And for people who don't want to just go get a 4-year college degree and go into that kind of career path, we ought to make a lot of other options available as well. It'll make us a stronger country, a stronger community, and it will certainly give us a stronger economy.
Thank you, sir. Following up immediately on what you just talked about, trade, the general manager of MBTA has a personal interest in vocational training. From her perspective, is those simple jobs, those ordinary jobs that are well paying, we don't have enough people in line for those. So Lynn can jump on the train, figuratively and literally, positioning, because the one opportunity she was looking at in Boston is all over the place. So here's an opportunity for all of those who have influence. I had not planned to make my quick remarks, but to focus on innovation and the arts. Again, Boston, you mentioned several other cities. I can say from my personal experience, the reason I dressed up like this today, because I'm going to a meeting. I got done in Boston in 7 months, what we've been taking over 3 years to get done in Lynn. So it's a question of leadership. So if we're looking as a nation at what's going to happen in the arts and development, look at Boston. The number of activities and the focus, and the big issue for us here in Lynn is inclusion. Inclusion. Are we listening to the voices with the arts and the artistry and those people? I'll close by saying this. We went out for our project requesting a laptop that would cost $13. We got $6,000 worth of donation. So much so that having received that equipment, it has catapulted our project 3 years ahead. That can happen here, but we are not inclusive in Lynn. Thank you.
Some great comments, thank you. So first of all, let me talk about the inclusion piece, because you're absolutely right. I mean, Lynn is a majority minority city, and yet that is not really represented in much of our leadership. That's a resource that we haven't tapped into, that we need to, and we will be a stronger economy if we can embrace all the benefits that having a diverse community brings to the table, rather than being afraid of it. So there's an awful lot in this discussion. This is an entire seminar or topic for a morning.
Honesty, sir.
But it's
honesty.
But it's very
Honesty.
important.
If the people are honest and Lynn, we'll deal with it, and we can be.
No, that's right, and we do have to address it because again, I think it's an economic opportunity that we've basically left on the table. I mean, I love going to the one of my favorite restaurants in downtown Lynn is a Salvadoran place. It's just extraordinary, and we should embrace that part of our community. And I think that there are a lot of people, frankly, who are more skittish about it. So that's an important topic, and we need to discuss it more. But let me go back to what you were saying about innovation. For the first time in 50 years, there are jobs that were shipped overseas that are starting to come back to America. Now, partly this is because of the rising cost of doing business in China. We shipped a lot of jobs to China. The Chinese economy is now getting more expensive. Labor costs are rising quite dramatically, doubling and tripling in some places. And as a result, when you factor in transportation and everything else, some of those companies that shipped jobs overseas 20 years ago are now starting to bring some of them home. But here's the problem. 20 years ago, they had 100 people working in a factory in Lowell, say, or in Lynn even. And they said it was going to be a lot cheaper to make this stuff overseas. So they shipped it over to China. And maybe they didn't have quite the level of productivity and labor productivity in China. So those jobs that 100 people did in Lynn were done by 150 people in China. Well, now that company is saying we can bring those jobs back here because even though it's more expensive to pay workers here in the United States, the productivity is so much higher, and the transportation costs, of course, are much lower because it's right here, and labor costs are rising in China, so we're going to bring those jobs back. But that does not mean 150 jobs are going to come back to Lynn. Because what happens is that as we have increased automation in our economy, in robots everywhere, those jobs that used to be 100 in America were 150 in China, now they're like 20, 25 back here. And so one of the questions that we have to ask when we look long term at how our economy is going to be, our local economy is going to be successful in this new world, is how do we attract the jobs that are not going to be taken away by automation? How do we attract the jobs that are still going to be here 20, 30, 50 years down the road, rather than jobs that are going to be replaced by a robot someday? It's an important question when you look at manufacturing, right? How many people are familiar with 3D printing? So 3D printing is pretty amazing, right? And it started off with just, you get this big box and you design a coffee cup on a computer monitor, and then it will print out this plastic coffee cup. And it was pretty flimsy at first, but it was pretty extraordinary that you could get a printer to do this. Well, now they have 3D printers that can produce things in titanium. And it's very, very important to understand this with regards to the GE aircraft plant, because an awful lot of aircraft parts and engine parts are now being made by 3D printers. And you might think that they wouldn't be as strong as parts that were made in a more traditional way. Actually, in many cases, they're finding that they're stronger, because rather than taking a huge block of titanium and cutting it so many different ways to get your part, every time you make a cut, there's a chance that there's a little bit of a crack or there's a weakness, basically. Now you're just literally building it from scratch. So you don't waste any titanium, because you only use exactly what you need, and there's never any cuts, so the part ends up being stronger. So you can do two things. You can either take this, in the face of this innovation, this dramatic change, you can either say, we're going to fight tooth and nail just to hang on to every last job of someone running a lathe that we can, or you can say, let's jump ahead and let's be the place that becomes known for 3D printing. And not only, we're gonna in the short run, you would lose some jobs because you don't have as many people manning the lathes that you did in the past. But if you can attract other innovative businesses who come here because of this area's 3D printing capability, which doesn't mean just having the machines, it means having the trained workers who know how to run them, then it can really help grow our economy, and it'll be a much more sustainable way to grow the economy than just trying to hold on to the old jobs of the past. That's what we mean when we talk about innovative manufacturing. It's not about just doing old manufacturing for new companies. It's really a different type of manufacturing that is absolutely the way of the future, whether you like it or not. And we shouldn't be sitting here thinking that we're gonna, we don't want to be in the tail end of that revolution. We want to be ahead of it.
Nick, did you have a question?
Yes. I noticed in this election that both you and your opponent had a similar message, which was, I will be independent, I will be thinking rationally, making rational choices. And that shows that, at least in Massachusetts, people value that. They value someone who, although someone has a D and someone has an R behind their name, they are able to stand up for something that just makes sense and vote that way, rather than voting in a partisan way, which has caused probably that deadlock. Now, considering that and looking at the big picture, what are your priorities and what are your interests as you go to DC? Considering, for example, the out-of-control federal debt, out-of-control illegal immigration, issues with Social Security, Medicare, terrorism rising, at the same time having those cost pressures in the defense system. How do you see you fitting in that picture?
It's a great question, because this was a very important part of my message throughout this campaign. I've said many times, it's not, neither the Democrats nor the Republicans have a monopoly on all the good ideas here. And we've got to get more people who are willing to work with both sides of the aisle to get things done. And there are a lot of people who run on that message in different parts of the country, but I can tell you right here in the 6th District, that's absolutely part of a huge part. I would say maybe the single most important part of why I won this election. So I take it as a mandate. I think, as a practical matter, it's the only way to get things done. I mean, look, I'm in a minority party in Washington, D.C. I can get all the Democrats in the room to agree with me, and that's not going to be enough to pass legislation. So it's just not a practical reality, right? In the political situation we have right now. But much more importantly, I believe that it's the hyper-partisanship that is dividing our country and is dividing our Congress, and has given us the least effective Congress in our nation's history. So you've got to be able to work with both sides of the aisle. If you look at the election results from this past election, I won by about 14 points in the general election. Martha Coakley lost this district by about 13 points. There's a 27-point difference there. So it shows that people in the state, and I think the world of Martha Coakley. She would have been a fantastic governor. But it shows that people in this district are willing to make different choices. And they're very happy to send a Democrat to Congress at the same time as they're electing a Republican to the State House. So I think Charlie Baker can be a great partner. And I'll tell you, I've already reached out to him twice and spoken with him and about working together. And he said that he would like to work very closely with me. So that will be a part of getting things done here. And I think we should be happy that Charlie Baker is from the 6th District. He should be our ally.
So thank you. Just a little housekeeping. The food was donated today by Side Kim Foods, and I want to thank Leslie and Sandy and the whole chamber staff. They put this together for us, and as usual, it's another flawless and wonderful event. And I was just curious, Seth, how did you do in the lottery for an office space down in Washington?
So I'm glad we can move on to more serious stuff. I did okay, but not as well as I would like to do in general. I picked number 34. There were 57 spots in the lottery, so 34 was a little below average for a pick. Certainly not the worst, but far from the best as well. But you got to make the most of a situation. And so what I did is I got together with 2 guys from my team, and we literally developed a spreadsheet with different criteria about all the different offices and ranked every single one of the 57. And there were only about, I think there were about 25 that had exterior views, which is nice. You really want to have windows that look out onto the street or something, not onto someone else's office, right? But if you just looked at the numbers, we were 34, and you figured that the ones with 25, the exterior views Well, apparently not every team consulted the floor plans in one. Because as we're going through and people are picking their rooms, every time someone picked a room that was below 34, right, in our ranking, we're like, that's a win. That's a win. And a lot of people weren't very well prepared. So we got the second to last office with exterior views. So it was a big win. So even when it comes to picking an office, I'm going to work hard. Thank you.
Seth, I just want to ask you too, if you could just stay for a couple of quick photos with my executive board, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
And I wanted to bring up one more topic. There was a great story on the item yesterday. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you, Tom.
Okay, yeah, so this story was about one of our greatest resources here, Tom Costin, former mayor, our youngest mayor ever in Lynn. And so it talked about his relationship with John F. Kennedy, another local guy, obviously, one of our great presidents. And so Tom told the story in the paper about receiving 6 tie clips from JFK in 1958, I believe. And he gave the 5th one, his last one that he was going to give away. I don't see one on today, Tom, but yes. But I was curious, Tom, if you could regale us with where the other 4 went. Who received those?
That's a secret. Family secret. But what I do want to do, though,
They can't hear you on TV.
What I do want to do, I just want to take a minute, if I could. The election is over, so I'm not trying to convince you to vote for this individual to be next congressman. That's all. Over 60 years ago, I started out with a very young man, just about the same age as this one, who proceeded to become a senator and then the president of the United States. At that time, in his start, as Seth is starting out right now, our congressman elect has more education ability than Jack Kennedy, has more personal experiences in everyday life than Jack Kennedy. He has more people across this country interested in him because of his leadership. I spent 1 hour with one of our major generals who was involved with Seth in his 4 tours in Iraq. And he told me stories about this man, and he was selected with his platoon to be the first one to go into Iraq because of his leadership abilities. This man, right now, is farther ahead in every area that we have to have in a congressman, and Jack Kennedy was back 60 years ago. This man has the ability because he listens and the way he handles things to be further along in politics in the United States. I won't be here to see it, but you can remember at some future date the top congressman of this state said that we're in the presence of the future leader of this country.
Tom, thank you for setting the bar so low. Not all is weird. The right place at the right time to be in the first company of Marines in the bag. But look, I'm going to work hard. My job is to be the best congressman that I can possibly be for this district. That's the job I have before me. I'm just getting up to speed. I have a lot to learn, a lot of work to do, an awful lot ahead of me. And it is not going to be an easy job. I think it's safe to say that it's a lot harder to be a congressman, an effective congressman today, than it was 50 years ago. And so this will not be easy. And I can tell you some of the things we're working on right now, besides picking an office in Washington, D.C., we're working on hiring a team. And I had an amazing team for the campaign. And just about every single person who worked for me in the campaign is applying for a job, but so are dozens and dozens of other people, both here and in Washington and elsewhere. We're gonna hire the best team that we possibly can to do the best job that we possibly can for this district. So I don't want to set expectations too high because this is not going to be easy. But one thing that you should absolutely have a very, very high expectation for is that I will work incredibly hard. And that, I promise you, it's an honor to be your next representative.